How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Tidal Gardens. I finally got a chance to meet back up with Will and check out his tank. Will actually has two tanks going. He's got one LPS system and then one larger SPS system that you see here, and they're both doing the Aquaforest method. The first time I did a video on this particular tank is way back in March 5th, where we're actually taking the tank down the stairs and everything like that and then setting it back up. So that would put this tank at 6 months old now. Actually, that's not quite true because there's 2 months in there that it was just cycling. So all things considered, especially with the newness of this tank, it's definitely growing in nicely. If you couldn't tell already, Will is a big fan of Acropora and SPS in general, but I would say that the vast majority of the corals you're going to see are Acropora, and I think there's also a little bit of a scattering of Montipora in there. One thing that's very noticeable with this tank compared to what it looked like just a couple months ago when I did kind of an update was the amount of nuisance algae on the rocks. Previously, you could definitely tell that there's a lot of that startup algae, so to speak, but pretty much all of that has been completely eradicated by both the chemistry and also the herbivores. Speaking of herbivores, Will had added this yellow tang to go along with the fox face that he had previously, and these guys pretty much did all the eradication that was necessary. But also he added in 5, I think, Necarious snails, and those 5 snails turned into what looks like 200 since they've been breeding, and occasionally you might see 1 or 2 on the glass, but they're covering all the flat surfaces, so some combination of both the snails and the fish have pretty much done away with all the nuisance algae. The next group of fish worth mentioning are kind of the pest control. So we have our trusty copperband from before, and he mainly takes out Aptasia and some bristleworms, things of that sort. I really love copperband butterflies. They do a great job on the reef, and they have a ton of personality. The only big worry is that they don't often take to frozen food, not too readily anyway. And so you might run into a situation where your specimen might starve. So one thing that I've found that helps a ton with this is to have a lot of live rock. So that's kind of only a solution for larger aquariums, but what you can do in a smaller aquarium is to have some live rock growing elsewhere and then cycle it in occasionally just to give that rotation of microfauna for it to eat. Last on the pest control list is this Leopard Grass. And if you've followed this channel at all, especially in the past year, I've been singing the praise of wrasses. Wrasses take care of a multitude of different pests, but mainly the ones that I'm worried most about are flatworms and also sea slugs. So wrasses in every tank as far as I'm concerned. And lastly, we have some purely ornamental fish. They don't really do any kind of particular job in the tank, but they are nice to look at. So we have some pajama cardinals, we have some firefish, and there is a Pseudochromis friedmani in there, and I didn't get a good close-up of it. I guess that one can do a job if you want something to eradicate bristleworms. Typically that type of Pseudochromis can do that. Alright, let's talk a little bit about the corals. Many of them are starting to grow quite nicely, and many of them also have gone through some significant color changes, so I will show you some in just a moment here. This bright neon green Acropora, for example, used to look like this, which is more what I would expect it to look like in the greenhouse, but you can see now that it's definitely taken on almost a much more neon green appearance, slightly less polyp extension, but definitely growing as well. Now, when it comes to polyp extension, sometimes that can just be a time of day thing where, like during the day, sometimes it might not extend quite as much, and later on in the afternoon or evening, they might have a lot more, I guess, like fuller polyp and a lot more polyp extension in general. So it's kind of hard to make that observation just based on one visit for an hour and then coming back later on and shooting for another hour. But it was one of the things that I just noticed on this particular trip. But again, could have just been time of day. Okay, let's take a look at another Acropora here. This one was a very thick branched one, picked up from Tidal Gardens, of course. And when we sold it, it was kind of a brown color, and it's definitely taken on this much more of a pink/purple hue. Now, a few months ago, it was slightly smaller, again, more polyp extension, but I can kind of tell that that color shift was already on its way from more of that brown color, more into the pinks and purples. It'll be interesting to see how this tank looks after a year, after 2 years. These tanks have to settle in quite a lot, and this one has already more or less settled in, and we're just kind of waiting on the different little small colonies to grow into big colonies. A tank video wouldn't be complete without looking at the equipment, so let's take a look at that now. Will is still using the Vertex sump. That's an Omega 250 protein skimmer, and Will was slightly self-conscious about how it was kind of dirty, but that's kind of the point. They're a sewage treatment plant. He's also using these bioblocks. I think those are for both nitrifying and denitrifying bacteria. For those unfamiliar, generally the nitrogen cycle is an aerobic process that breaks down ammonia into nitrite and then into nitrate, and a denitrifying anaerobic cycle turns that nitrate into nitrogen gas. I've never used those blocks personally, but that's kind of what they're supposed to do, both the aerobic and anaerobic processes. Here are the lines that dose the different components for Aquaforest. And lastly, the top-off reservoir was a little bit low, so this is Will filling it back up from his water purification system. Alright guys, that in a nutshell is this update for September. I'll probably stop by in another couple months here and see how the reef is progressing. It looks pretty good so far. I can again see that a lot of the corals are taking on different colors and growing a ton, and especially the clams and things like that, very healthy. And I am kind of curious to see also if Will decides to add more fish in the future. I'm usually more conservative when it comes to fish stocking levels, but the more I do this hobby, the more I can kind of see the benefit of having more fish. A lot of them do really important tasks, and I kind of like these systems that almost run themselves, more like an ecosystem, and I think that having a larger fish population kind of helps with that in its own little weird way. So in any case, let me know what you guys think. It just occurred to me that I bet a lot of you guys have not seen the previous videos I've done on Will's tanks. So on the end screen here, I'll provide links to those older videos, just so you can kind of get some context of where I was even coming from with most of what I was talking about in this video. So anyways, that's all from here. Happy reefing.